when you're driving your car, where your eyes go is where the steering wheel goes. That's just like a physical thing, right? Or a cognitive thing, or whatever you call it. The point of that analogy is media-wise, solutions-wise, if we keep pointing our eyes towards all the things that are not good,
right,
and bad, not working, guess where we're going to end up?
Yeah.
And guess where we keep tilting towards,
yeah,
right? Could we, or point our eyes towards these things work,
right?
Can we do more of that stuff?
You're listening to Granite Goodness, the podcast where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place.
Oh, Susie, where are you going now?
My name is Andy DeMeo. Today, I'm speaking to my friend Dovev Levine. Dovev is the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Affairs and Assistant Vice Provost for Outreach and Engagement at the University of New Hampshire. We talk about Leonardo da Vinci, the opportunities and pleasure of networking, giving the locker room speech for climate, going behind the scenes of New England's electrical grid, science and the public, hinge moments that change your life, becoming Voltron through teamwork, and a bunch of other stuff I hope you enjoy on this episode of Granite Goodness. I'm here today with my good friend, Dovev Levine. Dovev, welcome to Granite Goodness.
Thanks, Andy. Glad to have you over, and I'm glad to have a chat with you.
I say this for every guest of the podcast, it feels like, but it's really true for all of them. I knew that the moment I started this, that I would really want to have you on here. You're one of my favorite people. It feels like you have your fingers in all these really interesting pies, these sustainability finger pies that are all broad and diverse and make the world a better place. And let's get into the pies today.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
In your own words, I would like to hear your journey. How did you get into all this stuff? That being, sustainability, the NEMS network. Do you even think of yourself as a sustainability professional? Like, is that the right word? How did Dovev end up here? Who are you?
How far back should I go?
However far back.
Yeah. We just did our orientation for the SI Fellows Program, Sustainability Institute at UNH Fellows Program, that's been running for, this must be the 16th or 17th year. And I was a fellow in the first cohort way back, and I've been helping to coordinate it for about 9 years. So I love it. And one thing we've been doing for a while now is a thing called Life Map. And you draw out on a piece of paper kind of just how'd you get here, what brought you here. So I just had this kind of exercise in my head the other day, so I can talk about that.
Yeah, visualize your life map
I will
for
literally
us.
Visualize it for you. And I actually didn't have a chance to do mine because we had our fellows did theirs and ran out of time. So I'm actually going to be doing this in about 2 weeks with our new fellows crew. But this is what I'm going to be presenting.
Dovev is showing me a really wonderful piece of paper.
So I can use this as my flow chart to walk myself through how I got here.
Look at that.
It's pretty...
there's music notes. There's the UNH logo. There's a shoe.
Yep.
Is that a UFO? What is that?
That is a really bad rendering of the Northeastern University logo.
Oh, okay.
I'm not an artist, as you can see.
Sure.
So man, where do I start?
Well, you know what that is like to me? This is like pinging my brain. That is just like one of Da Vinci's notebook pages. They have all these things. They have, they call them the codexes, right? Mm-hmm. And super wealthy people will try and collect them a lot of the time. So, and it's just crazy. Like you can look up the notebook of Da Vinci and it's just like that, where it's this smattering of like human creativity and ideas and art and organization. And so I'm very interested to see what your final life map looks like.
Very poor man's Da Vinci.
No, there's a Da Vinci in all of us. You are a Renaissance guy. You are 100% a Renaissance individual.
I do like my analog a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Take us through.
So I got into it, somewhat kind of formally at UNH as an undergrad, like a lot of us do.
Yeah.
The way it happened was kind of happenstance. I'd always been interested in, broadly environmental issues and, starting to hear about climate change. This is around 1997, 98 or so.
Yeah.
So Kyoto is starting to, take effect, and we're having all discussions with Gore and Clinton
Right.
and all those things. And so I'm kind of hearing about it. I'm 20, I must have been, 18, 19 years old at the time. And so I took a gen ed at UNH called Environmental Conservation 535 with Chris Shadler. And I'm sure a lot of folks on that listen to the podcast will know who she is. She was kind of the person that ran like the big seminar on kind of like EC writ large, and it was covering all the kind of like broad major issues: deforestation, oceans, forestry issues, and then like a smattering of climate issues, which were obviously still really being kind of like being brought into the public realm at the time. So I was pretty, I was like, okay, this feels like, this is what gen eds do, right? They kind of, if they're done well, they kind of just open up a new thing for you to think about and get your brain gnawing on things. So I was into it. One thing that happened though was, so the prior semester, I took a history class. I was a history major.
Yeah.
And I took a class, and this woman sat next to me, and she was really nice, middle-aged. And we just kind of struck up a mini class friendship. We'd always talk together, before class started, and I just thought she was cool. And so the semester ends, and I start taking this EC 535 class, and it turns out she's the professor.
Oh, no kidding.
Chris, I didn't know you were the professor.
Right.
Like, you didn't, she was so cool that she doesn't even drop that on me, right? So it's a big, 500 people in the auditorium. So I go up to her. I'm like, hey, like, this is so cool. She's like, yeah, glad you're in the class. And so, I think I got sometimes you get a little lucky. That I had a little bit of existing connection with this really cool professor who was into the content. And so I just was, she's like, hey, like, you seem like you've got some potential. Anytime you want to stop by office hours, just, come on by. I'd love to learn more about your interests and our things in the class, striking you particularly. So I was getting some good advice from like my family, like, hey, when someone in a good position offers, a cup of coffee or have a talk, take it. Right. It's worth your time. Wow. Right. Worst case, you spend an hour with them. Best case is you get maybe a lifelong connection. Yeah. And so started just, chatting her up here and there. And that morphed into probably like maybe halfway or close to the end of the class. She's like, hey, I need some TAs next year. Would you want to consider that? Yeah. And I had never thought about that. So I was going to my senior year. And at the time, you could get credit, like class credit for being a TA.
Right.
And so she set me up to be one of her quote unquote lab TAs.
Yeah.
It's really a discussion section. So every week, like every Thursday for like 90 minutes, I would run this section of her class. And it was, 15 students, never taught before. And it wasn't quite teaching. It was really just kind of like taking that week's readings.
Yeah.
We do like various different things. Like I'd either kind of like help them weed themselves through it. Was there anything interesting about this?
Facilitating.
Yeah, facilitating discussion. And found out I was half decent at it, at least for, at the time. I've gotten better.
The raw talent.
Yeah, I guess so. And but what struck me was that I was decent at it, and more importantly, I really liked it.
Yeah.
Right. Felt good. A little nerve-wracking, right, for any 20-year-old.
Sure.
It's like in front of like 15 students who are all my age, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I kind of like this. And so that got me kind of on the path of like, all right, I want to do something with students. And I wanted something with like next generation. This feels good, right? So career-wise, and I was still like, do I go to law school? Do I, I was thinking about policy stuff. You know, classic senior year type things. You don't quite know what you're doing, and so that was kind of the beginning though. And so that kind of got stuff in my mind about environmental issues, and then kind of fast forward. I graduate from UNH, and at that point, I was like, maybe like some kind of like environmental law.
Sure.
And I didn't really know what that meant, right? And so I actually got a job with an environmental law or environmental nonprofit that does a lot of legal stuff. And what I found was quickly, I wasn't really into the legal stuff, and that's not a knock on that profession. It wasn't really a lot of easements and like very like boundary type things, a lot of land conservation. which is really important. Not really quite what I was into.
Yeah.
So I kind of took a step back. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just like, focus on the higher ed student thing. Because I also had a couple of other experiences at UNH. One was I was a advisor for our judicial programs office. And that was a cool experience. That was my whole senior year, basically at UNH. At least I don't know if it works this way now. But if students are written up for different infractions of a student code, whether it's like cheating or underage drinking or whatever it is, right? Things you get in trouble for.
Yeah.
That are not necessarily like police type stuff, more dealt with like within university.
Right.
They set you up with a student advisor to help walk you through the system. Not quite a lawyer per se, but
Right.
someone's like an advocate.
I see.
Right. And my job wasn't to get people off the hook. It was to make sure they understood what was going on and make sure they can make it as like smooth as possible in terms
Right.
of here's the charges, here's what your options are, here's how it works. And
And you speaking strictly as an observer, of course, you never would have been on the other end of that
of course
table.
not, never.
Absolutely
Straight
not.
arrow all the way.
Yeah.
Like, well, there was also the other offer is you can be a panel member. And that's where you're deciding as like kind of like
wow.
a jury of peers.
Wow.
Which I found, I'm like, that's not me. Because say, I was, doing things
Yeah,
that were
drinking
not
in the
necessarily
dorms.
Yeah, again, would never do that. But say I was doing that, it would be a little hypocritical for me to take that position. So I was like, I'll take the one where I'm like trying to help the kid.
Yeah.
And because I'm like, I can understand what they're going through for the most
Right.
part. And that kind of helped me to basically kind of cement like, yes, I really like helping students at minimum. If I can't like help them, at least make it like really clear. Here's what's going on. And can we get the best outcome for you?
Right.
That's reasonable, right? Again, not off the hook, but like there are sanctions. This is educational. This is
Yeah.
what's happening to you.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
But the counseling spoke to you.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Being an advisor and
Yeah.
a facilitator of
Yep.
informal judicial process.
Yeah.
Right. But it's the same thing about that spoke to you like it did in the classroom workshop.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Felt good.
And that kind of pulled you back into the direction of, maybe I do really like
Yeah.
being in this role
Yeah.
for students, right?
Yep. Yeah. So going back to the, job at the nonprofit environmental thing. So I'm like, maybe it's like not necessarily environment or that sort of thing. Maybe it's more the, counseling and
Yeah.
advising, as you pointed out. So I was thinking about things and then I'm like, well, maybe I'll try to get a job at university being like a career advisor or something like that. And quickly learned that it's hard to get that kind of job without a master's degree.
Yeah.
And a master's in like student affairs or like higher ed counseling is the way to go. So I started looking at schools in Boston and I was looking at BC and BU and I called up my judicial programs supervisor, this guy Bill, who was really cool and we had a good relationship. And I call his office at UNH to just ask for, can I talk to him so I can get a recommendation for grad school? And they're like, oh, he's moved on to Northeastern. So I call him there and he's like, hey, Devev, like, that's great. Like, that's awesome. You're thinking about that. He's like, hey, while you're applying, we actually have that kind of program at Northeastern. And I've got an assistantship in my office this fall that will pay for tuition,
There you go.
stipend. And do you want to apply? I'm like, yeah. So I applied, got in and got the position. So I ended up being the, like grad coordinator for judicial programs at Northeastern
Right.
for him.
Wow.
And that paid for school, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, all right, next steps. I started applying for jobs around just the, Boston area and had some stuff at UVM and then UNH. And what was happening was, my then girlfriend, now wife, Janelle,
Yeah.
and I were, we're loving Boston. It's really fun. We're 23.
Yeah.
24 years old. It's, every weekend there's stuff going on.
People are making movies.
Oh, yeah.
You're in movies. Huh? That was my experience.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Well, and I also was once young and in love and in Boston. Mm-hmm. It's a charmed place to
It's
be.
great. But what happened was it was really fun. We had probably, 25 of our closest friends from UNH we graduated and then moved down together.
Yeah.
And we didn't live together, but we were all
Yeah,
within
you're
like
all
1
there.
square mile between, Alston, Brighton, Cambridge,
Yes.
Newton. We're all there. And it was just a continuation
Right.
of UNH for better or for worse. And it was so fun. But then you get, so we're starting to get to our mid-20s. We're starting to think about just like next steps. And we could slowly see people start moving out.
They leave.
We're like, are we going to be the last ones here? And can we afford it? And this is where we want to raise kids if we have
Right.
kids, all this stuff. And so we had been taking like day trips here and there out to Seacoast,
Yeah.
New Hampshire, particularly Portsmouth. And we just kind of get out here for like the day just to get out of Boston.
Right.
And we're like, this is pretty cool. And so I remember this specific moment where we're at Friendly Toast
Yeah.
in Portsmouth and we're just eating lunch and we got to drive back to Boston in a couple hours. And we're like, oh man, like the city in August and it's so fun. But also we're
Right.
getting a little tired of like
Yeah.
just city.
Everyone's moving. It's moving
Yeah.
season in
Yeah.
August.
Yeah.
When students move.
Yeah. And we're like, this is so nice up here. We'd like spent the day at Rye and,
Yeah.
it's just like, this could be a place that we could make our home at. And so I remember like, we were like, all right, you know what? Like this probably maybe, I don't know, like mid-spring of my last year of grad school.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to look at jobs and we decided right there, like, let's just make it work here.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, let me back up. That was year 1 of grad school. It was a
Okay.
2-year program and we're there. And so my next year is last year of the program. And that's where you do an internship.
Right.
And you can do it anywhere. It's got to be in higher ed setting. It's got to be in the area you want to be in. If you're smart, then you do it in a place that you want to get a job at. That's
Yeah.
a great way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, right.
And so that's when we're like, let's just do it. I'll have that internship at UNH. I'll drive up 3 days a week from Boston just to kind of get my foot in the door.
Right.
So I got I basically finagled an unpaid internship, which was harder than you'd think it would be.
I don't know. It
I-
sounds pretty hard.
Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, I'm so psyched I got this unpaid internship. And I really was.
Yeah.
And it was a good experience. I ended up working for the Career and Academic Advising Center at UNH. Great experience. And that was my entire second year. And what happened was I was, doing well on this track for like career academic advisor. That's what I want to do. And I started looking for jobs at UNH and just nothing's open up.
Right.
And so I got to close to end of spring. I've got an offer at this point from UVM to go be their like associate director of judicial programs. And I'm 24 years old. So I'm like, say back to your question about like, did you ever do anything?
How
like
many
now,
more students can I counsel about not drinking in the dorms?
I
right?
in
Like-
all in that's point, I'm not counseling them. I'm actually in charge of like the sanction
Oh,
and
gosh.
dismissing them. And
Yeah.
I'm like, because I'm
This isn't my calling.
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. Like I've been told I look younger than my age. So you can imagine me at 24.
This guy?
Yeah, like
This
this
guy's
guy's
expelling me?
right?
Yeah.
And I would want to like be social. So I'm like, God, I'd be like out downtown to see this kid.
Right.
The whole thing just didn't quite feel right.
Yeah.
UVM is awesome, and I thought about it, but like that doesn't quite feel right. So at the same time, I was looking to apply to UNH, and this job opened up at the grad school at UNH, and I'm like, this sounds cool. So it was basically this funny position. It was an admissions officer position, but it had like a bunch of equity inclusion work attached to it. They were trying to get themselves as an office deeper into DEI
Yeah.
type work and efforts on behalf of the grad student population. And it was a mixture of like recruiting underrepresented students and then working with them to support them and make them feel like they belong and all these
Right.
things. I'm like, that really kind of spoke to me. I'm like, that'd be really cool. So I'll come back to that piece in a second.
Yeah.
Remind me to do that. And so I remember I was like, man, I want this job, or like I really am interested. So I put a suit on, just walked my resume over to the grad school, which is in Thompson Hall, which is like the administrative building
Yeah.
where the president works. Never been inside there
Right.
my whole time at UNH. And it's kind of scary if you don't know it. And so I walk in and I find the guy in charge, this guy Harry, and knock on the door. And I remember the day, like I knock on the door, turns around a solo chair. He's like, yes. And I go, hey, I'm Devev. I'm really interested in the job. Here's my resume. He's like, you can leave that with the secretary.
Oh.
And I should back up. So what I did though is I figured out that one of the people supervising me at the internship had been a GA, a grad assistant at the grad school. So I told her I was looking at that job. She's like,
That's
oh, tell Dean Richards,
Right.
Harry, that you work with me. So I mentioned that to him. And so I remember this. He's like, yeah, leave the resume in the box and we're reviewing it. We'll let you know.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, and by the way, I work with Carol Tong. And he's like, oh, on the way out, he's like, have Carol call me about something. And so, okay. I'm like, okay. So I go back and I tell her to give him a call. And then she's like, next day it's like, yeah, he was asking about you. So I gave you a glowing recommendation and
Man.
I got the offer to interview a week later.
Yeah.
And, long story short, got the job.
Right.
I remember specifically I interviewed and I thought I did well. And at the end, I'm like, so what's the next step? And he goes, well, there's 160 applicants. So I'm like, I'm never going to get this job.
Yeah.
And I got it. And I
Right.
still to this day have when I got the job first day, I took a sticky note and wrote 160
Nice.
on it, put it right in the dead center bottom of my monitor.
I
to
love
remind
that.
Me, it's like, all right, like you're lucky,
Yeah.
unfortunate, and don't forget that. And so I'd never wanted to forget that feeling of like how excited
Yeah.
I was to get the offer.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was one of the better days of my career.
Seeing the trajectory of your life, right, in your career as kind of a series of these hinge points, whether it's meeting that woman who was your classmate and then the professor, kind of by accident falling into the judicial programs kind of stuff, and then realizing, well, there's aspects of that you liked but didn't like it. I'm enjoying a lot hearing you tell the story, like getting caught up in these little details of, oh, actually, that wasn't my, last year of grad school, that was my first year. And those aren't really the things that you actually remember that much, right? Of like the minutia timing of when exactly did that happen?
Yeah.
But you remember so vividly, I met this really fascinating woman who ended up being the professor. I met this guy, at first he dismissed me and then found out someone had a connection to him and I pushed on that and it ended up being the thing, right?
Exactly.
And it's kind of like your superhero origin story a little bit, because these are all things, it's a total full circle thing. You are a facilitator of all these networks. You are a great networker. People come to you. I really like hearing, oh, this maybe was the first time that Dovev saw the value of just having a human connection to somebody and what that can really feel good, but also do for you professionally, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's learned experience, right? You just kind of see it happen for yourself. And, I think I said earlier, like, oh, I was lucky. And yeah, there's a little bit of luck. I might get the saying wrong, but it's like, like luck favors the prepared or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, yeah, there's some luck in it. And it's a lot of, but you're setting yourself up to use those connections. And not all of them pan out, right?
Right.
There's been a zillion of them. You've done that too, where it's like, I thought we'd connect, but it didn't really happen. That's okay. That's how it is. And you got to just follow those seeds, follow your gut.
Right.
Harry used to always say, like, he's like, as long as you're, again, like, if it's been working for you so far, then trust your gut.
Yeah.
You got to follow things that just seem right to you. And that's been good advice for me.
Did you always imagine that someday be running a big, robust network of, students interested in sustainability or municipal officers interested in sustainability?
Yeah.
Like,
So
how did
here's
all
what
that
happened.
materialize?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, like, how to get from, all right, so you're going to be a career advisor, now you're working as admissions officer, now you're doing DEI work. And so, kind of the brief answer to that is, after about a year, and it may be my first, like, annual review, was I'm talking to Harry, Dean Richards, and he's like, all right, so what's pretty young, what's the career track? And I'm not really sure. And so we kind of got into a discussion. He's like, I think I could see you as some kind of dean down the road, right? Not tomorrow, not this year.
Right.
A lot of work, but if you're interested in this kind of stuff, and you want to grow, that could be a direction for you. Like, it sounds great. Yeah. So I'm like, all right, so what do I got to do? He's like, you got to get a PhD. And I'm like, oh man. So
No one's ever said that to me.
yeah, right. So, and I go, in what area? And he's like, it doesn't matter. He's like, it's about, like, you're going to, if you're a dean, then you're working with faculty and there's a certain credential you got to have.
It doesn't matter is what he said.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And I'm overplaying it a little bit.
Right.
But he's like, the subject matter area really.
Sure.
It's not that you, like, education can help you or this, that, and the other thing. It's really that you've been through the process, right? You've done, like, worked with a chair of your committee as a PhD student. You've, like, been able to go through all your comps, all the stuff that's
you
pretty,
understand academia. Right?
relatively, tricky stuff that, not everyone can do. And so there's a certain gravitas that comes with it. And obviously the credential doesn't hurt when you're dealing with chairs of departments and other deans and all that stuff, right? He's like, it's just the way it is. He's like, not my role.
Right.
DevEv, it's just the way it is. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. So he convinced me. So I start looking at PhD programs, and I tried a couple, just didn't quite fit. And it's not, again, those were great programs. It wasn't for me. And then what happened was I ended up going to a program, and we had a pro seminar class, which is where you just kind of get exposed to all different threads of that discipline, and that helps you to think about, what kind of project you want to do or dissertation and stuff like that. And they had given us an article to read that was about basically like impacts on the Inuit population resulting from climate change. And I was really, really into that. This was not an environmental or climate-based program.
Right.
That was kind of just happenstance. And so I'm like, I found myself reading it. I'm like, this is the first thing I've read this entire time in this major or this program that I was like feeling like, oh, I would read this anyways.
Right.
And so I went to them like, is there a way to convert my program into, or my study into more of like environmental, natural resources? And like, you could do it, but add on 2 or 3 years. I'm like, that sounds awful. So I'm like, could I take a class then in that area elsewhere, and then I can still hold my place? I'm like, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I looked around and I, consulted all these course catalogs. I'm like, all right. So I kind of, now I'm starting to go back to like the environmental piece.
Right.
And now I've got a reason to really do so, because I've got to find something that is interesting to me that I'm going to spend the next half dozen years on thinking about. 'Cause I'm going to do it part-time. The PhD program is going to take me a while.
Right.
There's got to be stuff, and this is true for any, would-be grad student. It's got to be stuff that you're really like deep in your heart. Just you'd read it anyways.
Yeah.
Or you'd think about it all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of do that. And so I found this class in the poli-sci department at UNH, and it's taught by this professor, Stacy Vanderveer. Didn't know him at all. So I was then thinking about, all right, should I apply to the PhD program in natural resources at UNH? And you have to have basically a sponsor, like a would-be advisor.
Yeah.
They got basically, like, as part of your application package, say that if DevEv's admitted, I will advise him.
Right.
You got to have that as part of it. It's a prerequisite for application. And so I call him and I'm like, hey, I'm going to take your class. Would you be my advisor? He's like, let's talk in 3 months.
He's like, we just met.
Yeah, it's like,
You
I'd
want
like
to
to know.
date first?
Yeah, how about slow down?
Yeah.
And he's like, how about we see how you read and write and
Yeah.
deal in class and all this stuff. So, anyways, so I took class, loved it. It was awesome, and it was basically this international environmental governance class. It was really, again, talking about how do different, sectors interact, especially on kind of the international front, which then brought in a big climate piece to it, right? Because again, Kyoto's coming into force.
Right.
So we talked a lot about that. And I'm like, man, I'm just so into this.
Yeah.
Like, this just feels like I could sink my teeth into this big time.
Yeah.
So end of the class, we talk. And he's like, yeah, I'm happy to, jump on and we can have you apply and I'll sponsor you. He's like, but I'm not a faculty member in that department, so I also have to apply simultaneously. And he was, relatively not like new career, but he's kind of like still pretty young.
Yeah.
Probably mid-30s at the time. And he's like, you'd be my first doctoral student, so we're going to do this together. And I'm like, okay. And so he took a chance on me, which
Yeah.
was really cool. And it worked out great. Love that guy. And he was an awesome advisor. I was his only doctoral student for the first 5-6 years. So I got a lot of attention.
No one could ever measure up.
We'll see about that.
Yeah.
So, but so he learned. I think he developed a lot. Concurrently with me, who went through it together. He was so good, and so I think the quick takeaway is like within 6 months, like now he's got me like knee deep in climate governance policy stuff, and I'm like, man, this is obviously so important, and I'm just like so compelled by it, right? Like I could read this stuff all day and talk about it. And so quickly it morphed into like DevEv's doing this to get a promotion to
Right.
Yeah. And doing it because I just was so into it. I'm like, I did not realize how much I'd be into the study.
Yeah.
And this sector in this area. And so basically got the program done. True to his word, Harry, I think it was like the next day I passed my defense. Got minted as a PhD, and he came in with a letter next day and his assistant dean promotion.
Oh, man.
I'm like, man, you were like true to your word.
That's that.
And then he retired 3 months later.
Wow.
And so that was a really, that was just like, that's mentorship.
Right.
As like, showing me an avenue that made sense to me,
Right.
and then helped me think about how to get there.
Yeah.
In all kinds of different ways. And within that, there was all these, this like hundreds of hours of like talks. And I think he was particularly great at really helping me think through life. A lot
Right.
of ways, like there's a lot of stuff about family and, how am I doing as like a young dad? And it was just well-rounded.
It
mentorship.
wasn't just, your professional stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So that taught me a lot. That really influenced how I think about, when I'm trying to help out, next generation and working with my, my fellows and, not my fellows, but the fellows, and I'm helping out. And I'm on some committees now
Yeah.
with students. And so that's really, I'm trying to measure up to that.
Yeah.
I'm still getting better at it.
Right.
And the same goes for my PhD advisor, Stacy. Just was so good at the same thing. Like, how's the family doing? How does this interact with that? Where you want to go? How do I help you get there? All with both of them. They were like, there was a lot of butt kicking, mentally
Sure.
speaking, right? It wasn't like, hey, like, like totally like it's all good and
Well, they
you're
should
great.
push you, though, right?
They pushed me a lot. It
Yeah.
was like I like tough coaching
Yeah.
in hindsight, when it's done right.
Yeah.
And that was done really well, which is like call me out when I was either kind of like not like giving my full effort, like you
Yeah.
can do better, classic stuff like that. And that was, that was pretty often. I've learned about myself. Like I definitely sometimes I've gotten better about this finally. But for a long time, I think that I probably was underperforming
Sure.
a bit. And having people that recognize that about you
Yeah.
and both kind of get you to do better, like day to day,
Yeah.
but more broadly speaking, changing the way you think so that you can then do it without them.
Yeah.
That's coaching and that's mentoring. Like
Well,
changing the way
no
you
one
think.
gets to the Olympics alone.
Oh yeah, not even
Right.
close.
Like you just don't. Maybe there was one guy
Yeah.
I heard of who he was somewhere relatively remote, and he apparently watched a bunch of YouTube videos on like how to throw a javelin. I don't know if he found a javelin coach, but like he's the exception.
Yeah.
So maybe you're in his league now, but
Yeah. I'm not that guy. So, and so, I want to also call out, we had, at the time, Associate Dean Carrie Moorhead. I'm sure a lot of listeners will know. She became the dean of the grad school once Harry retired. And she was the same thing, like just,
yeah,
quasi family member, just like there for me and
Right.
same thing, but also really, identifying, was it like, good mentors will really help you lead into your strengths, identify them, and manage challenges.
Yeah.
Like, what are things that you can get better at? It's not you have to become like a superstar at those
Right.
things you're not good at. Like I'm not particularly great at, like some of the quantitative stuff.
Sure.
Is not really my strength, right?
Yeah.
So, but could I get good enough to be able to do a reasonable,
yeah,
regression analysis?
right.
Right. I can do that.
Or are you
know?
performing best at the things we know
Yeah.
you can do, right? Optimally.
Yep.
You talk about your kind of nascent interest in this stuff, right? Was learning about these massive international environmental negotiations, right? On issues that are bigger than life, like climate and the management of emissions and all that. And understanding, the negotiation piece, right? The human side of it. And this is something that I see you express and kind of live now, right? Even through like the NEMS network is a good example.
Yep.
You work with and help facilitate the interactions of all these people who work in, municipal sustainability, right? And whether it's on that scale, kind of local people, I'm butchering what they probably do, getting better light bulbs installed in the town hall, or whether it's two countries negotiating, an emissions agreement, right? I see this common thread for you as a person. You engage with these massively complicated systems, but again and again and again, it's all about what's human oriented about this. Because it can all feel so abstract,
Yep.
right? The issues, even the systems designed that are supposed to help us fix them,
Yep.
like the negotiations and treaties and all that. Your entire career, right, so far has, into my ears, been a story of I had a series of really wonderful human to human interactions, and these served me and helped me move towards solving really hard problems. So is that how you think of all this stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
the networking and
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of the best way to frame to answer your question.
I didn't
It's
even
real
ask
good
a
one.
question. I just,
Yeah, no, you're a really good inquisitor, so I want to call that out. You're a good question asker.
Inquisitor is I'm going to use that going forward.
All right.
No one expects the podcast Inquisition.
What I'd say is, one thing I've picked up on is that, stuff like equity inclusion,
Yeah.
climate work, it can get depressing real quick.
Sure.
You know that as well as I do, right?
Yeah.
It's actually, that's almost the default mode. It's not good,
Yeah, there's not
Right.
great news on this every day.
right? On the climate front, the data does not suggest that we're going to get to any place but a very bad place really quick.
Right.
And by the way, I mean, when I started out my PhD studies, this is back in 04, 05, if I remember right, the mixture of what I was reading, which is kind of like the, state of the art climate policy stuff,
Yeah.
literature out there, was really still very much, and it still is to an extent, but it felt like it was 70% mitigation stuff and 30% adaptation.
Yeah.
And now it's all the chats I'm in, it almost feels flipped.
Wow.
And it's gotten there, relatively fast.
Yeah.
And I remember, specifically a lot of the literature was all right, by, 2050, by 2060, we're going to see these really horrendous impacts, which, we're there now.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just amazing to me, how fast, the kind of, borderline nightmare scenarios have.
Well, in your lifetime,
Yeah.
right? Like your young adult life to your
Yeah.
life now.
Yeah. I'm not that old yet.
You've seen it.
And so it's still kind of a shock to the system, knowing how quickly I think some of the IPCC folks were saying this could happen,
Right.
But these feedback loops have, I think, come along way quicker than any of us thought it would.
Right.
So I'm saying that because, all right, so it's easy to get depressed, and then it's really hard to get myself and others motivated if it's we're all screwed.
Right.
You can't live like that, right? You cannot get anything done. So I've always kind of felt like there's got to be a better way to get people motivated and get actual action done instead of sit around and talk about how bad it is.
Right.
It doesn't get you anywhere, right? I always analogize it to, I coach my kids' sports teams a lot. So I'm man, if I came in, for my son's soccer game at halftime, we're down 7-0.
Right.
And I spent the entire halftime speech lamenting how behind we are and how bad we're playing.
Yeah.
And then, all right, go out there and try harder. Is that going to get them anywhere?
No.
No, right? If I come in and I'm hey, we're down 7-0, we can, I noticed that when we cross it, we actually got some opportunities.
Yeah.
Why don't we do more of that?
Have you given those locker room speeches before?
No locker rooms yet, mostly, but side of the field all the time.
You're giving the locker room speech for climate. That's what this is.
Yeah. Why not, right? That thing worked.
Right.
And maybe it's a shot, is it, likely that we're going to come back from the 7-0 hole? Probably not, but we're here.
Right.
Why not try?
Yeah.
And there's a thing about, even being for example, 30% less screwed
Yeah.
would be great,
It's a lot.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a whole, there's a lot of inertia in this stuff, right? And a lot of momentum that it's going to be tough to slow it down. And can we at least shave off a good part of it? Because
Right.
every piece of, every, 0.01% degree Celsius we can avoid,
Yeah.
it's, translates into a whole array of benefits, or at least avoided
Yeah.
negative
Reduction
outcomes,
of
right?
suffering.
Right. So it's real, there's still real work that can be done. And the good news is it's all doable, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I really try to come at it from a positive mindset type thing. Because that's just, to me, what we need to do.
Yeah.
And it gets people together.
Well, and you walk the walk. You organized this really wonderful event. I mean, you've done many of them, but I went to one a couple weeks ago, Seacoast Sips.
Yeah.
You got a couple UNH researchers who do stuff on climate to come out and talk about this. This was your choice, as I understand it, to get these people out and say, hey, talk about this issue to the public, but give us something optimistic, give us some solutions.
Yeah.
And I mean, that event, for those who weren't there, who might be listening, it was a smash hit. totally sold out. People loved it. I was there, and like everyone had a great time. It's clear that people are hungry for this kind of stuff.
Yep.
I just wanted to point that like you're actually out there,
Yeah.
making some of this stuff
Yeah.
happen, which is
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. First, I want to shout out my Sips of Science crew, because it's not just me. It's really the brainchild of Professor Christine Caputo
Sure.
at UNH, who's awesome, and she's kind of the lead person on it. And then we've got this kind of relatively small committee or panel, whatever you want to call it, of myself, a couple staff members,
Yeah.
Beth Podier from UNH, who's awesome, and 4 or 5 grad students who are amazing. And we meet monthly at least just to game plan.
Yeah.
And it's a really, really, in my mind, well done, pint and a talk series.
Yeah.
And that's not anything new.
Right.
What we're tapping into, though, is that there seems to be a pretty big demand out there for doing it well. And what I'm struck by is that I think it works because it's positive.
Yeah.
Right. We really try to bring solutions oriented stuff, not like if you went to a 2-hour talk at the brewery and just heard like over and over from 3 speakers about how bad things are.
Right.
All right, good night. Then it's like you wouldn't want to go back.
No.
Or to your point, framing it in, yes, of course we got to acknowledge that there's a lot of things that are needing to be fixed. Got to point that out and how or why, and then pivot to, and here's what we could do, right?
Yeah.
Here's collective action, here's call to action. So we really try to lean into that. And what I'm struck almost even more by is I keep hearing the word fun when I ask people, like, how was it? Did you like it? Like, yeah, it was really fun.
Right.
Right? Like making a climate talk fun.
Not
Is
a word
pretty-
you'd expect to hear.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool, kind of counterintuitive almost. And what I've learned from that is like we can make all these things enjoyable,
Yeah.
right? At least to a certain extent, where it's going back to the thing about networking, the human element. If you could, turn these things into things that people would want to do, not because it's just, we got to do it, and what people want to turn out because it's just enjoyable, right?
Yeah.
Like we're working on something really tough. I found that like good shared work is one of the best ways to connect to people, right? You've got a shared desired outcome,
Yeah.
and can we work together? Like that's one of my favorite things when you get that right team together,
Mm-hmm.
and or get it out to the public, and they like feel it and they become part of the
Right.
whole, the whole thing. Nothing feels better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how.
To be part of a true Voltron unit.
Yeah,
All the
yeah.
legs and the arms come together.
Yeah, or if you watch hoops, like watching like that, like those 5 players on the floor when they're really connecting passes,
Yeah.
like they're moving to the right spots, and there's a whole system,
Right.
And they're just enjoying like being with each other. Like that's just, to me, that's the best.
And dare I say, as someone who has seen kind of every side of these issues, leading with positivity, maybe even a little optimism, it doesn't just feel better, but I think actually it's a better way.
Yep.
Like you get more out of people, you
Yep.
get them more engaged. It's actually quite pragmatic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is something that your work has helped shown me.
Yeah,
This isn't just like floofy feel good. It's like, oh, if you're serious about solving these problems, you have to understand how to legitimately engage people
Yeah.
for a sustainable amount of time, right?
exactly. Pragmatic is exactly that word. And, it's not my idea. Like this is not
Yeah.
like I invented this. And so I just, good connectivity, you also get shared ideas from folks. Like I heard one last year from a colleague of mine, and she was showing me this, she's referencing it because we're talking about positive media.
Yeah.
And we got to have more of it, right?
Yeah.
Like if you looked at, you wouldn't know that we have, I think you pointed this out in one of our fellows alumni calls recently. It's like, hey, like we have yet again set an all-time record for renewable energy development.
It happens all
globally,
the time.
right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't really know that from reading most mainstream outlets,
Right.
Even like the Times or the Globe or whatever.
Yeah.
And pointing that stuff out, it's not to be Pollyannish. Like, of course, we have got way more work to do,
Right.
And you can't just be like we're losing all the time,
Yeah.
right? Could you replicate and scale things that are happening that are good? That's the way to go,
Right.
And that's remind to come back to that. That's where NEMS comes in,
Yeah.
for me. But so real quick, 'cause I think it's just such a cool way to think about it. So I was talking to a colleague of mine. It's like, yeah, I just had a speaker. I forget her name, but she was doing this TED talk, and the whole point of it was she opens with, when you're driving your car, where your eyes go is where the steering wheel goes. Like that's just like a physical thing,
Yeah.
right? Or a cognitive thing, or whatever you call it. The point of that analogy is media wise, solutions wise, if we keep pointing our eyes towards all the things that are not good
Right.
and bad, not working, guess where we're going to end up?
Yeah.
And guess where we keep tilting towards?
Yeah.
Right? Could we, or point our eyes towards these things work?
Right.
Can we do more of that stuff? Right? That's kind of that was kind of a really, that synopsized for me and cemented in my mind what I was trying to think about. I'm like, that to me is the analogy.
Right.
Can we get-
That's a really nice way of, particularly for Americans, right? Who are
Yeah.
like, we're very car oriented culture. That I think is the way to sell
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really cool way of thinking about it. That kind of was like, yeah, that's where I want to be and help that kind of
Yeah.
become more part of the fabric.
An emerging theme of this podcast is that progress on these issues, or on any issue, right? But particularly the sustainability stuff. It's slow, it's not always sexy, and it takes time. And, if you want to talk about progressing on, whatever it is, renewables, energy efficiency at the local level, this is like the dirty jobs of sustainability, right? Like what you're doing in the NEMS network is, I feel like, the real meat and potatoes
Thanks.
of this stuff. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Like share with the viewers.
Sure.
What is it? What do you like about it?
Yeah. So NEMS is the New England Municipality Sustainability Network.
Yeah.
A lot of syllables. NEMS network. And it's a consortium or network of about 35, 36 municipalities spread out across New England. So all 6 states are represented. And we've got a really nice mixture of like the quote unquote bigger cities,
Yeah.
which really is Boston, but Providence, Portland, Burlington. We get small pretty fast
Yeah.
in New England, and then a bunch of mid-sized and smaller communities. And the way it works is it's membership based, and members have to be a full-time sustainability or planner type
Yeah.
staff person in their municipality. And you basically have to kind of get nominated to join as a community. And if you want to do it, then your mayor has to send in a letter of support to say that, if accepted, I will support,
Right.
this person's and this office's work to be a part of NEMS, so that we know that the community is fully in.
Right. There's buy-in.
Yeah, there's no like, oh, we actually are not going to do that sort of thing. So it's like the group at the municipal level to get together. And so it's basically these 35 municipalities wanting to do more collective action from that city and town level.
Yeah.
Which I'm compelled by, because going back to positive stories, what I kept seeing in my PhD studies was like, man, like the international and the federal, national,
Yeah.
fronts, not a lot of great progress.
Right.
For a long time, the U.S. really had no particular climate action at the national level.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of suggestions and, there's funding, but it's different from like regulations and,
Right.
policy work. And so, what I was seeing just from all the studies and things that, having to read was, at the state and sub-state level, that's where really innovative, interesting, productive stuff was happening, right?
Yeah.
At universities, corporations, at least some corporations, nonprofits, and city and town.
Yeah.
That's where the cool stuff happens. So I got real compelled with, can we basically identify those things, shine a spotlight on them, and get them to click together better so that there's more collective action to these things. That's what NEMS is kind of all about.
Yeah.
So basically what we've been in effect for probably about a dozen years or so. And what's cool about us, we're one of 5 or so organizations that are run under a particular umbrella. And there's one the West Coast, there's one Southeast, there's one for New England. We're in the New England one. We're the only ones run by a university. And so there's a really interesting kind of potential here to tap into all the things that a university could offer.
Yeah.
Research, students,
Right.
that sort of thing. And so what we've been doing is, for our fellows program at SI, we've had a lot of those fellows be tasked
Right.
to working on things at those cities and towns that they need help with. Greenhouse gas inventories, climate action planning, resiliency planning,
Yeah.
you name it. We've had fellows helping them. And so that's really a nod to all these communities largely are often suffering from bandwidth issues, right?
Yeah.
They've got one person trying to do 5 different jobs, like we all are in some ways,
Right.
but that seems particularly prevalent and really, not damaging is not the right word, but it slows down progress,
Right.
Because they want to do things, and then they were like, but I've got 5 other things I got to work on at the same time. How do I
Yeah.
get this grant put together? How do I, on. So we're trying to help out with bandwidth issues. And now what we're trying to do is really steer into, is there more stuff we could do, students at UNH, both at undergrad, well, definitely at the grad level, and many of our undergrad programs, you got to do a capstone.
Right.
Masters have to do a thesis or a project. PhD students have to do dissertation. Can we get more of those students to be doing applied engaged research in ways that, for example, within NEMS, maybe there's more opportunity to have a student doing a 5-year PhD study.
Right.
Could you tap them into what the city of Boston needs?
Yeah.
Or Portsmouth or whatever.
What I really like about some of the stuff you do with NEMS is that you get all these people interacting in a non-institutionalized way. You'll meet a couple times a year, virtually on Zoom, to facilitate things, but you'll meet up in real life, once or twice a year too, right? A summit or a get together. And
Yeah, so that's really, to me, the bones of NEMS and why it works is we really lean into that. And that, I kind of inherited it. Like they were doing at least an annual, if not biannual get together. And the way we do it is it's, a bunch of meetings about sharing out where you're at, what are things that you're commonly challenged by, things that are working for you. And then there's always a long dinner. And then there's a après dinner. And that's where a lot of the real talking happens.
Right.
Because we've gotten to know each other so well. Like there are a lot of people that predate me. And I've been involved for almost a decade.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a really, really, really good crew of people. Just personality wise, there's a lot of yes and folks in there.
Yeah.
That get it and want to work collectively. And that's just so invigorating.
Right.
Right. And now it's point where hey, how's the kids and hey,
Right.
that thing that you were talking about last time, how's it going? There's a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And that really helps the work to get done, right? We enjoy each other, and we really trust each other. So we know it's working because there's a lot of offline stuff that, even my colleagues at UNH that run it with me. Shout out to Jen Andrews at SI, who's my
She's gotten a shout out before,
Uh-huh.
and she's going to be on here eventually.
Oh, nice.
If I
She
can
gets
get her.
lots of shout outs, I'm sure. She's
Yeah.
awesome. We'll come back to Jen if we want to as well. And my connection to her.
Yeah.
And so, it's really good group of people. And, what we lean into is that, we know that there's lots of, offline chats happening where now it's like phone a friend. And how did you get that climate action plan put together and what didn't work? And
Right.
that to me is really, really powerful. And so we're trying to make sure we can retain that as we continue to grow a little bit every year. We're still thinking about what's the right size for this thing.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing about, because we get more requests than we actually have members for.
Sure.
We probably get, 2 or 3 minimum per year. And that's just kind of cold calls or someone heard about us. And we think very carefully through all right, are you going to be an actual participatory member? Are you going to show up? Are you going
Right.
to add to the conversation? That sort of thing. And so we're pretty careful. And we're trying to think about how do we retain that intimacy and connectivity, and also continue to get to the right size
Yeah.
as well. So what's exciting now also is that we've got the interpersonal stuff pretty well honed. So now we're how do we start to do more collective action together? Tapping into, there's been a long desire on everyone's behalf of are there things that we could be doing either for advocacy of certain things, are things that we're really challenged by that we just could get better at and help others understand too.
Yeah.
One thing that comes up a lot is energy consumption, energy policy, constraints on adding more renewables to the grid, how municipalities access it,
Right.
and pricing and all those things, right? And what I've been struck by is how much we're on the more knowledgeable side of the public,
Yeah.
and all stuff that all of us are man, I didn't it's
Yeah.
kind of fascinating, or it's actually extremely fascinating, right? How how grid modernization
It's like a
is gonna come up,
marketplace,
right?
right?
It's a
Like
marketplace.
people bid for energy and stuff.
How public utility commissions factor into it, how ISO New England in this area factors into all of that, how you
Yeah.
could advocate for certain changes, what's the first place to actually start with,
Yeah.
right? So we've really we've recognized that comes up a lot. So one of our members, Troy Moon from Portland, who's amazing, and he's got all kinds of connections. And so he brought in, he knows someone from the Acadia Center, which is a nonprofit in Boston. You may have heard of them. Really, really cool shop that particularly works on, how do we get more renewable energy into the grid and used at price points that make sense for people.
Yeah.
And then all things that, energy democracy, equity with it,
Right.
low income incentives, all those things, right?
Yeah.
And so we had one of their people come in to do just like a talk to us last year that was really well received. And they were like, oh, can we bring it back we do every month there's a virtual brown bag lunch that we do.
Yeah.
Where we just we're recognizing that we do these, every 6 months in-person meetings that are like, you've been to those where you're like,
Yeah.
go to a conference, you're energized,
Right.
like, we're going to do all this stuff. And then 6 months passes and you got to kind of almost like
What
start
happens?
over.
Yeah.
Right. And so we all recognize like, man, we enjoy hanging out. We want to get more consistency in it. So it's like, you don't lose all that momentum.
Right.
And so we agreed on, let's try to do a bi-monthly brown bag.
Yeah.
And the way we set it up is 1 hour. The steering committee, which Jen and I helped to basically administer, basically like just takes ideas like, hey, what are people thinking about? So like how we're thinking about how do we access like all the IRA funding?
Right.
Like, towns are having trouble often accessing it, knowing how to apply and whatever it is, right? There's a million things. We did one natural gas marketplaces, all kinds of stuff. And so those have been really, really well received. So now we've got like basically an every other month check-in, and we've got the majority of our members showing up for those things.
Yeah.
And having a real good chat. And so going back to the Acadia Center, what we've recognized is we are now bringing them in as essentially like our like non-municipal partner.
Right.
And they're going to really help us to think through on the energy side, what stuff that we can do better at from a municipality standpoint together.
Yeah.
And so we're actually doing our next in-person meeting in 2 weeks. We're going to do it in Northampton, Mass. We're doing it
Nice.
there because ISO New England headquarters is located about 20 minutes from there.
Really?
So we've got now a tour of ISO New England. You get to see like I haven't been there. So
Yeah.
I'm real excited. There's like this big control center, right? And their charge is basically to help to, run the entire grid
Yeah.
system
Wow.
of New England. So it's really important to know how it works and to know what are some entry points that we can be doing to help them think through from our perspective,
Yeah.
right? Are there things that we can help to nudge them on, and that sort of thing. So we're going to get a tour and then like a kind of Q&A with them, and we're theming the whole meeting around energy policy, advocacy, that sort of thing.
I'll have to add this to my my Western Massachusetts rotation.
Yeah.
Right. My brother lives out there. My grandma lives out there. So I always do a kind of tour.
Yeah.
Right. I'll see them both at the
Yeah.
same time, and brother, grandma, ISO New England headquarters.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a natural compliment.
Yeah. So you should actually come to one of our meetings sometime.
I'd love to.
Or even be like a part of it. Like we're opening it up more and more. We've got some PhD students coming with us.
If you need some representation from the tiniest New England towns, Tamworth. Tamworth is actually a friend of mine actually might be a good candidate for this. This is just making this metaphor come to mind, right? My wife used to work in some of the coastal resilience stuff, and she would always explain to me, 2 solutions for sea level rise. A lot of communities have to kind of think of as, well, we can put in a seawall, or over time we can put in a living shoreline. And a seawall, it's a lot of money up front, and it's strongest the day that you put it in.
Yep.
And it just gets weaker and weaker over time, right? And the inverse is true for a living shoreline, right? Where it's not that much money. It is weakest the day you put it in, but the longer that goes on.
Yep.
I don't know that that's a perfect analogy for what you do with NEMS, but
Yeah.
there is something to be said for that, I think, of like getting to know these people. And they're even, I'm sure it's this way everywhere, but this is a kind of cultural New England thing, I think, where my wife and I just moved to a small town in northern New Hampshire last year, and we know that it'll be, 6 years minimum before we're considered part of this town, right? And that's part of like the New England small town heritage. But the work really doesn't start to get going until you feel like you can trust these people and they can trust you.
Yep.
And then you get to know them and you say, okay, Devev, this is really how it works in my town, and I know you, and I know that you're a good guy. What can we do to help each other, right? It's a living shoreline of people.
Exactly. And that's kind of speaking to, I think about co-benefits all the time. Like we do this, we also spin that off into these other three things that would help. Like on that one, it's also not just getting people in your town to trust you, but could that also help to then strengthen that town's own community engagement network, right? Like the whole thing about bowling alone, and we're like quickly losing trust in institutions, community engagement across the board, right? All that stuff is, going lower by the year.
Yeah.
And that's, not distinct from the problems that we got to address. Going back to our earlier, an hour ago, we can't deal with these things unless we're together.
Yeah.
And those are things that can then bring people together again in a functional, productive way that's sustainable.
Yeah.
Right.
The whole theme of, again, these systems, they're so large and they're so complicated, but I think that it is a reason for, some of that decline in like trust in the institutional stuff, is that it's become so easy to forget that it is all, there are humans at every point of it. There's a human on the other side every time. And that fundamentally, these systems are supposed to serve human ends, right? And if they're not, then something's gone awry. And
exactly. And that's what I think a lot about on that human side is one of the best books I read when I was a grad student doing the climate stuff was it's called State House and Greenhouse. It's by Barry Rabe, who is a University of Michigan political scientist. And the whole point of the book is about climate work at the State House level. And what he really was kind of fixated on was the role of like what he calls like the mid-level entrepreneur, mid-level policy entrepreneur.
Sure.
And basically, the point was there's a lot of action and connectivity to be had at that like associate director kind of person in the State House, because you can access them easily. And these are really knowledgeable people that have the ear of governors and councilmen, you name it, right? People above them and below them. So there's connective tissue and you can get to them. And if we could do a better job of supporting that kind of person and helping to connect them better, you could get a lot more wins. Wow. And I kind of took that. I think that's true at other sectors too.
Yeah.
Universities, towns, regions. So I've thought a lot about, what always drives me kind of crazy is like in the climate context, you've got all these different nonprofits that are trying to do really, really good work.
Yeah.
A lot of them, I just think that there's more. Some of them kind of are running parallel, trying to get the same place. Well, why not? It's kind of like if it was like a road trip analogy. Why not like carpool? Yeah, share the gas. We might live to learn. We might get to know each other better.
We should we should just do one grand carpool.
Yeah, right. And that's probably a bad analogy.
Planet Earth is a giant carpool in its own way, right?
Yeah, or take the train or whatever, right? Point being that I think there's a lot more focus that could be had in getting all those different people individually and also all those different organizations bolted together in ways that would produce kind of like really good positive feedback loops for each other and make the work easier and make it more interesting and getting those personal connections, make it more fun. You get the idea. So I think this, one thing that if I could do more of, that's what I'm trying to lean into. Things like NEMS, I think, speak to that. And what we're trying to do, we have a lot more work to do on it, but trying to get those places and people to just be that much more connected.
This, I think, is, in theory, right, what is supposed to work really, really well about democracies, right? The democratic, open society where instead of, an alternative where when problems arise in a system, the solutions are top down from people who maybe aren't on the ground knowing what it's like to be a regular person. Finding who are those hinge point people who can efficiently and authentically take in, oh, hey, there's 12 different organizations working on this issue that represent, thousands of people and constituents. It's like, in theory, it's supposed to be like, really, we're crowdsourcing the solutions to every, miniature problem you can think of, right? those are the kinds of stories that I think are so cool and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, when this stuff works really well, it works really, really well.
Yep.
Good solutions to hard problems can flow upward and make the way
Yep.
to the right people.
Yep.
But it's not going to happen without those. I'm mushing my hands together like a lattice, my fingers, without the human connection.
Yep.
Right. I mean that's just your whole jam.
Exactly. And that's the story. I mean, just to give an example of it, like that's how my understanding is the UNH Eco Line came about. Because that's
Really?
12 miles of, underground pipeline.
Yeah, not an easy
Can you imagine how
thing.
many yards you had to go through from Rochester to Durham
Right.
to get that pipe in there?
Yeah.
You gotta get all these different exceptions and approvals, and it's state, different towns, individual landowners. It's a just huge amount of work.
Bureaucracy cake.
Yeah. And my understanding of it is that, that came about because there was a really good amount of trust and relationship building that was at the forefront and at the center of all that stuff that made it work, right? We had to get different exceptions from the state to get it done.
Yeah.
It's just a good example of how you can actually really imagine something into reality
Yeah.
if you get the right people into the mix.
Well, it's so interesting too, because my understanding, and you would know more about this, right, is that even on the policy and implementation side of say the renewables issue, right, that I think is one of the really big pieces that's now missing, right? Like you talked about for a long time, there was, a lack of cohesive federal climate policy. Now we have that, or a version of it with the IRA and whatnot, right? And, the issue is that, there's money for all these things now, but that's not enough. Really, in some ways, the more important part is the other stuff,
Yep.
the meat. I overuse the phrase meat and potatoes, right? But, the people and the relationship building and the trust in the community of like, okay, you can say we have, $500 million to put in, a brand spanking new whatever, waste processing system, renewable facility, all that. But there's no point if the people whose lives are going to be affected by it, they don't know who you are.
Exactly.
And I'd like to think it's a balance, right? It's a dance to find the right balance of like, what's the best way to go about it. But you're never going to go wrong by leaning into who are these people?
Exactly.
How can we find the win-win solutions? And you do that all the time.
Yeah, or trying to. And that's where, also I'm compelled by, the role of higher ed and stuff. But, I'm working for a public flagship state university. There's a real anchor institution aspect to that.
Yeah.
And I think there's more to be had, right? Like really like as a convener of these kinds of things and like really being a center point. We're seeing it through NEMS
Right.
at one level. I think there's even more we could be doing to really pull that stuff together.
Yeah.
And act as a central place for that stuff.
You're leaning into resources that are already there, right? And in theory, like you're able to extract and produce so much progress on all these issues. And my sense is it doesn't cost that much money to just get all these people together.
Yep.
You talk about university as an anchor point. It is reminding me a lot of the Master Gardener programs. You know about the Master Gardener program? Or like the extension, right? The UNH cooperative extension. A lot of universities have the cooperative extension. Many people don't know this, but they have a gardener hotline that's on, not 24/7, but a lot of the entire work week for sure, and certainly weekends. You can call anytime and get an expert gardener on the phone, and they will answer your question, whatever it is, within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And they have like a free seed program, and like the amount of money that it takes to do that program, it's like pennies. And the value that they bring to the state and to the communities and all that is, if you were to express that in terms of ROI, it would blow the brains of finance people. And there's so many examples of that. And I think you are doing exactly the same sort of thing, right? Of like, this isn't actually a big budget project or enterprise that we're doing, but we're really just thinking outside of the box of finding ways for these people who maybe don't usually interact or don't usually interact in these ways, right? Outside of their like day jobs, getting them together and breaching those boundaries for all these systems that again are supposed to serve human ends.
Exactly.
You're gardening.
Yeah.
You're gardening people.
Yeah. I didn't know about the gardening program. And again, that's like that phone a friend kind of thing, like feeling that support behind you, and it just makes the whole thing better.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. Can you talk to me a little bit about your work with the Sustainability Fellows Program,
Yeah.
which I think is a really good complement to, all this other stuff that you do. Other folks have talked about that program, but you are front and center of that thing. I mean, the orientation was last week and you were there. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So again, we're in year 16, I think. And I was in the first cohort as a fellow, and we had, I think, 8 or 9 in there. And it was a really good experience back then. It has grown so much. The staff, we've got a lead administrator of the program, Alexis Dwyer, who is amazing. She's so good, so smooth.
She's great.
Yeah. And Jen and I, and then Cameron Wake was part of it for a long time, Fana Bucher,
Yeah.
and Fiona. It's just an amazing staff. So I'm just part of this really good team, right? We work well together. And, the program, I think the number is we've turned out about 300 fellows.
Wow.
And we've grown every year. And the way it works is it's a full-time, high-impact, full immersion program during the summer. So it starts late May and goes to roughly, mid to late August, 40 hours a week. And every fellow is basically working with an organization or a town or a company or university. Any different sector is eligible, and they're working with one of those entities on a specific sustainability related project that entity needs help with, right? So again, everything from greenhouse gas inventories, climate action planning. We've got students working on community center inventories. There's one working on an EPA and Department of Environmental Services project about how New Hampshire is going to grow its action for climate-based issues. On and on and on. There's food related projects. And what always strikes me is, we'll talk to the mentors at the organizational level at the end. How'd it go? Like, what did you? And to a T, these different mentors are like, my fellow was amazing. She did so much work. We, were able to get all this progress made. And then they'll lament the fact that now the summer's over and they're like, now what? Right? So it just speaks to the fact that, man, they really, not just that the fellow had a really educational growth experience, which is key to it. We're trying to grow we're trying to help to, produce, part of the next generation of professionals in the sustainability arena. And that, again, at the same time, these entities are getting much needed capacity to the point where they're like, how do we continue without that person?
Yeah.
That's a really, we need to solve that.
Yeah.
That's a really, the feedback, that's what we want to hear.
Right.
Right. That they were critical to getting stuff done.
Yeah.
And that to me is, for a late, undergrad person, these are, pretty young people.
Yeah.
Right. Early masters, early PhD. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Or really impressive, I should say. And so it's just such a cool thing to be involved in, and that we really lean into, how do we get both the fellows to have a real good experience in the project, but also how do we get them network together? So you've been part of this, and we're thinking a lot about how the alumni of both the fellows program, but also, sustainability alumni from other different parts of the university.
Yeah.
That we've been obviously running at the same time in really great ways. How can we get these fellows also to continue to connect past that summer or past that academic year? I think we're starting to make a lot of headway.
Yeah.
Right. We got our crew working. We're starting to expand that and formalize it more. That to me is really exciting because it goes right into that. How do we really help people to continue to find the support and just the collective mindset stuff that would be really helpful to start to generate, fresh ideas and just all that peer shared learning and support that we need to have.
Yeah.
And making it again in an enjoyable way,
The real impact, it's the work for sure, that the students do, the experiences that they have, the work that the organizations do, right? But it's also just, as you say, the 300 strong, 400, 500, however many people have been through the program, all having had this kind of wonderful immersed experience together. Yeah. It's a little bit like you say, you have conferences with people and there's a great kind of chaotic energy, that comes out of when you're in a time and a place with people, and it's like, it's so exciting. And how do you how do you keep that going? And what I think is really cool, other than, you know, all the things you mentioned, right, is the growth of the program and the testimonies that people have had with it speak for themselves, you know, on the student and the mentor side. You know, the program, like, they don't just take anybody, you know, whether it's a project idea or I mean, you know, many people apply for it both to be fellows and to have projects. I'm sure they don't like to turn anybody down, right? But like they're quite intentional about which projects they select and let in. And the fact that it's been going for so long from the beginning, I don't have the sense that the program has pursued scale at all costs, right? You've been quite intentional about, no, we want to give everyone who does this on the mentor and the mentee side a really great experience. And that's our focus. And, you know, the growth will come if that's our goal. And you've totally, like, you've done it. We're here. It's, I mean, you're at like 50 now, and it's kind of that choice of like, we can grow this more if we want. We can keep it as is. There's advantages to both. Like, it's a really great success story.
50 fellows a summer with roughly 45 organizations
Wow.
that they're working for. That's a lot of different entities throughout New Hampshire and New England. There's a couple outside New England, but that's really, you know, we've got a lot of different people that have been involved either this summer or over the years. And so to that point also, I mean, the reason why it works well also is because of all that. It's not just, all right, fellow, good luck. See you in August. It's we do a weekly get together. We divvy up the entire set of fellows into cohorts of roughly 6 to 8 or so. So my cohort that I'm advising is, or co-advising, is the community engagement cohort. So it's 11 fellows, 11 projects that are all doing something that's particularly community engagement focused. And then what they do is they meet weekly. We do it over Zoom. We'd love to do it in person, but we're just too spread out. So we do a weekly call every Tuesday with all of them. And then myself and Megan Carney, who's also been a part of this program over the years. We facilitate the discussion every other week and then give them every other week just to get together on their own. And that is really important to retain that, because you can't have a 50-person Zoom call. It just doesn't work well, right?
Chaos.
10 people, 11 people. Yeah, you can get through like, hey, how's it going? Like, quick go around. What's working? What's not? What are things that we can learn from together? That stuff really matters, and it helps to cement relationships. So hopefully there'll be, again, beyond the summer, like, hey, that was my cohort buddy. I can still call her and ask for some advice or job connections, whatever it is. That intimacy is really critical, for sure. Just to speak to the prestige of it, we had, so for the 50 fellows or 49 fellows, we had 317 applications.
Wow.
Right? That's competitive.
Yeah.
Right? The word's out there. We're really, really good. And to your point, we get way more. We do an RFP process every year. So it's not just like, hey, any project is game. We take it very seriously. And what's the impact of this particular project? Is it meaningful? Is it doable? That's huge, right? Sometimes they'll come in, they want the fellow to solve the entire thing. No, can we slice that down? So we either say, hey, come back next year with a more concise proposal. And or we'll work with them to say, yep, overall good. Can we work with you to kind of modify this in a way that over 3 months you actually get a good product out of it. So it's tangible. You could use that as a tool. That kind of thing is really key part of it.
You are as academically credentialed as a person can be. Literally, you have a PhD. And you are one of those, like, I know rationally that you have a PhD, but you're one of those people who, like, you would never demand that someone call you doctor. Something that another guest, Faina, right, she was on here, and I feel like you're going to relate to this. She basically said, I've spent some time in academia, and it was great. I enjoyed, defining and learning about these problems, but there was a limit to which that felt useful in the real world. And speaking as her, she said, I wanted to get out of that a little bit. And you balance those things really well, right? Where, you've gone through the process, right? Like your mentor told you, said, you got to get a PhD. You got to understand how academics think, how universities work. But you, more than anyone I know, probably are so focused on what's really happening, like what is the real impact that we're having here. So tell me about that balance in your head. Is that something that you were thinking about during your time in academia, or?
I mean, I think about that a lot, which is also, there's a whole you see the news and you feel it, right? There is a major questioning right now going on. It's been happening for quite a while in the value of higher ed.
Yeah.
Right. What is the value proposition of what we do? I think about that a lot. And to me, I think that the way forward, it's got to be that higher ed gets way, way more immersed in those on the ground problems.
Yeah.
In a way that's, yeah, the theory and the academic study and the publications, those all matter. And can we do that better?
Right.
Can we do that in a much more applied fashion? Right. You see some universities starting to do that. I think UNH is getting there.
Yeah.
So that's why, again, so doing things like the fellows program, where it's like on the ground, tangible, real, relevant work in an academic based setting, is where it's at.
Yeah.
An example, like one of the projects I'm really excited about this summer, and it's a continuation from last year. We're working with the New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority.
Yeah.
To do this really cool project on basically inventorying all of the state's community centers,
Yeah.
quote unquote. I say that because you could define community centers in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
An actual community center, a library,
Right.
a public, a different kind of public space. There's a different way to define it depending on the context.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking to the CDFA folks last year about things that they want to work on. They've got funding essentially to strengthen the community center picture in New Hampshire. And what we don't have is an actual map
Sure.
of, well, what are we starting with? Like,
Yeah.
you can't improve it if you don't know what your baseline is.
Yeah.
Right. So we're starting from kind of somewhat, not ground zero, but kind of close to it, which is, can we just draw a basic picture of what the community center situation is
Yeah.
in New Hampshire of all 235 municipalities?
Right.
And then use that to identify gaps, what's really working, and we could do that better.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And we've
Yeah.
got a fellow at the absolute center of that work. Isn't that really cool?
That is like the coolest thing I've ever heard in
right?
my life.
It's kind of, it's innovative and
Yeah.
groundbreaking, and it has the potential for how that could be then utilized in a, huge array of different ways, right?
Right.
You can think about it from a climate standpoint. Community centers often more and more can and are being used as cooling centers.
Yeah.
Right, in places that have all kinds of heat equity issues. If
Right.
they're in a city and you've got places where folks don't have the access to air conditioning, for example, and other things they need, could you have community centers play a larger role in that? Absolutely.
Yeah.
More public space development in general, right? Getting people together, public spheres, all that stuff, and that turns directly back into sustainability and climate, development and different ways that we can do things.
Right. Well, it really begs the question: how is sustainability distinct from any? I mean, it's
Right.
like the mega issue. It's
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
what are we sustaining? Why? How?
Exactly.
know?
Exactly. So that goes back to your question about, all right, the role of higher ed. Well, that's right there. That is UNH playing a huge role in
Yeah.
this on the ground. We're going to have this thing done relatively soon, and that's going to be translated into different recommendations and action for policy development,
Right.
funding, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Can we do more of that from an academic standpoint? Absolutely.
Yeah. And who else would be better poised to look at that at kind of the network scale, right? It's one of those ideas that, like, it's such a good idea, you're surprised that no one's ever done it, right? Of like, wait, no one's really just gone and inventoried
Yep.
in a modern, easy way.
Yeah.
All the community centers that are out there.
Exactly.
How's that
And,
possible?
Yeah. So who is better than a higher ed institution
Yeah.
to be at the center of that,
Right.
right? You've got the intellectual kind of capacity. You've got also, you've got students that both need and want to do this stuff,
Right.
that have the ability to do it. It's perfect.
And the extension system,
Yep.
as well. Like, there's all these arms built in that,
Exactly,
are
exactly.
for the public.
Yeah. Yeah. So we do a lot of that already. And again, going back to, like, I would love to see just more, how do we tighten the bolts
Yeah.
of our work, both within UNH and then externally, and all those things that are happening. But it's like, we don't have a good picture of a lot of that stuff. Can we do a better job to really illustrate it?
Yeah.
And define it and know who's working with who? Like, I get, I run into these things often, which is that I'll be working with, state entity, and then I'll talk to someone. Hey, I just started connecting with this person. Oh, I already work with them.
Right.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And, that happens all the time. So I kind of feel like we're just leaving a lot on the table
Right.
by not having a better way of illustrating the stuff and really leveraging those connections.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're there to be had.
It's just like your map, right? We opened this conversation talking about your mind map of your life and career, but like it's all a mind map.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the state, the problems, the communities, the way people interact.
Exactly.
Let's get it on paper.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one thing that, you know, also in my mind a lot is when we do the stuff, how do we sustain the attention
Yeah.
to get it done? Because I'm like, you know, by nature, and this is something my mentors, you know, kind of figured out about me early on, is I think by nature I can be a little scattered. And any of my friends that will listen to this would say, oh man, Devev, yeah, that's like...
Just like Da Vinci, by the way.
Oh yeah. And so I've kind of, you know, gotten that like mentally beaten out of me over the years by people that know me well and want me to do better, which I still struggle with sometimes, but you know, I've been at least self-aware of it.
Yeah.
And then translating that into the actual work that I do, but also you can see that as we just get more attention deficited. That's probably not a word, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? With
It's hard to be focused in the
it
modern
is
world.
in a
It's
digital
very
age.
hard.
It is, and it's. I suffer from that sometimes, where it's like, yep, the phone is just like pinging, and it's an attraction. It's
Right.
not just about the smartphone.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing where it's like we got to get better at least understanding how that stuff can also be really helpful.
Yeah.
And can really be a challenge in getting stuff done the way it needs to get done.
Right.
You know, not all right, next thing.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it's we gotta just get, you know, that one thing done and sticking with it.
Yeah.
And I think universities have a big role to play in that. Kind of like there's a mindset and an attention and mindfulness piece to all this stuff.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
say we can run this program and we know it'll exist
Mm-hmm.
for, 10 years, 20 years, right? Or a study or something like that, right? There is it is hard to resist kind of the short-term nature, but like so many of our problems, as you say, are the solutions are longitudinal in nature, right? To understand them deeply. I don't know what you would want more than saying, hey, let's map all the community centers. Let's see how they're doing.
Yeah.
Let's look at that information over 10 years,
Right.
See what problems. I mean, even that could be so useful for like how many small towns struggle with, addiction, right? And how many lessons could be learned that could be applicable from one town to another town, or whether, pick your issue, So many solutions I feel like get found when we kind of break the box
Yep.
of, hey, this is the way that we're supposed to interact with each other, but I trust you now because we've met at a conference and we've had drinks
Exactly.
a couple times. and,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly. And it's like, can we do some of the basic, fundamental, non-rocket sciencey stuff
Yeah.
well and do it year over year
Yeah.
to the point where it's like ingrained
Yeah.
and we know it's working well. That to me is one of the keys,
Yeah.
you know?
I've had you on here for 90 minutes now, so I've got to ask. I mean, you've already given me a great answer. What makes you optimistic
Yeah.
about your work, the future of this work, any of it?
Yeah. I think the people, just finding, the more I get into my career and I meet more folks across the state and within the university and beyond New England, there's just a lot of people out there that want to do the right thing. Many of them are, a lot of them are, I want to get involved, right?
Yeah.
So I really do think tapping into that energy, harnessing it and making it easy for people to get engaged in the issues that they want to work on because they fundamentally feel like they need to
Yeah.
and would feel good about it, and getting them together. That to me, I think that's where I find hope.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Like, it just makes you feel like relative to a lot of the problems we face, there is an abundance of energy to solve them. It's just about finding it and channeling it in the right way, right?
Yep.
And you do that really well.
Thanks.
It's really important.
Trying.
And I think you're great.
Right back at you.
Thank you so much for coming on Granite Goodness, Dovev.
My pleasure.
Hey there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator of Granite Goodness and the host of the Granite Goodness podcast, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.